Thank you for joining us tonight. Uh, my name is Nikunj Trivedi, and I'm currently the president of Coalition of Hindus of North America. And today's session is going to be very special. We have Dr. Gautam Sen with us as well. And the topic today is US foreign policy, India, and the implications for Hindus. A little bit about CoHNA. CoHNA is a grassroots level advocacy organization dedicated to improving the understanding of Hinduism in North America by working on matters related to the Hindu community and by educating the public about Hindu heritage and tradition. If you'd like to get more information, please visit our website at cohna.org, COHNA.org, or follow us on Twitter at CoHNA Official or on Facebook at CoHNA Official as well. So a little bit about Dr. Gautam Sen. Dr. Gautam Sen taught international political economy at the London School of Economics and the Political Science for more than 2 decades. He is the co-director of the Dharmic Ideas and Policy Foundation, a think tank which works to articulate policy impacts on the Dharmic communities in the UK and elsewhere in the world. He is a member of the steering committee of the World Hindu Economic Forum and president of the World Association of Hindu Academicians. He's also the co-author of Analyzing the Global Political Economy, Princeton 2009. So welcome, Dr. Gautam Sen. Nice to have you here, and looking forward to our conversation. So first thing, I wanted to just have a quick, and as a reminder to all the viewers, if you would like to ask questions, please post them on the comment box in Facebook. We are not going to be able to check any emails on this live show. So please send us your comments in Facebook. So Dr. Gautam Sen, I wanted to ask you first, what has been in your, you've been teaching this subject for many, many years now. What's been the general policy and US approach to India?
Let me begin by congratulating you, Nikunj, on this wonderful initiative. I think this is something which should happen in other countries as well. So thank you for inviting me as well. I'm honored to be on it. On the specific question of US foreign policy towards India, it's a complicated story. In the 40s, before India became independent, the US representative was quite hostile to British colonialism in India. And Winston Churchill complained to Roosevelt to have him removed because he was creating a lot of trouble and, in fact, advocating Indian independence. So that was a very good start. The poor man got recalled by the United States because it was the war, etc., etc. Now, after that, it got a little bit complicated because of the Cold War and the conflict between the USSR and the Western Alliance. And India's position within that became a critical factor for US foreign policy. Now, to start with, right the way through Truman, Eisenhower, relations were quite amicable. And there was a desire in the United States for India to be a bulwark of democracy and an alternative to the communist path, because the communists had come to power in 1949 in China. But India didn't quite play along. India wanted to retain its policy autonomy, and they chose non-alignment, that they would be equidistant. And this was a source of unhappiness. The British, of course, were playing the long, devious game that they had refined over several hundred years. And they were absolutely thrilled that Pakistan had been created. It was not entirely due to British policy, but the British certainly did hinder it. And what happened was they wanted some kind of toehold and base south of Afghanistan, because they were always afraid the Soviets would enter, and they wanted. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, being a very shrewd man, very quickly said to the British, "Oh, you can have Karachi Harbour." Unfortunately, Nehru was not such a good tactician. He had said no to the British on the use of Mumbai. So all these things complicated Indian relations. And then, though the US retained goodwill right up to the time of Kennedy, they were not happy. And the Pakistanis were very smart. And you cannot understand India's relationship with the United States without talking about Pakistan. They joined CETO, CENTO, became part of the Western Alliance. So it was, for them, a big bonus. Pakistan was us to them, whereas India was not. India also began to follow a planned socialist path from 1951, and that continued right actually till 1990, but actually still continues today. And to fast forward, Nehru made 3 catastrophic blunders which have continued to haunt us. One, he did not expend the energy and the pain and the blood to retake the whole of Kashmir, particularly Gilgit. Now, Gilgit was under the jurisdiction of the Maharaja, Hari Singh. It was Kashmir territory. Major Brown of the British Army threw out the Maharaja's people and handed it over to Pakistan. Now, Gilgit was of vital importance to India because it offered land access to Afghanistan. So losing Gilgit was a catastrophe for India. That was the first catastrophe. The second one, brilliant young officer called Sumal Sinha, who retired as ambassador to Lebanon in the end, who spoke fluent Mandarin, knew China. He had told Nehru, the Chinese are going to grab Tibet. Nehru said, I don't think so. Then they did. And then he told Nehru in the late 50s that they may attack us. Nehru said to him, you don't understand foreign policy, and sent him off to a refresher course in Harvard. And then the Chinese attacked. And he writes, and I know his nephew, he writes that I got a telegram to come back immediately. I came back, and then Nehru signed a piece of paper saying, no policy document on China will pass without the counter signature of Mr. Sumal Sinha. And Sumal Sinha said it was too late. Now, in 1962, the Chinese chose a very good moment to attack India. They attacked India during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Americans were distracted, the Western alliance was not on, and the Russians. Now, what Nehru did not know, and he should have, that the Russians would not be able to restrain the Chinese because the Russians and Chinese had fallen out by 1956. So this was the third catastrophe. First, Gilgit-Baltistan, second, Tibet, and third, the 1962 war. And eventually that really killed Nehru. I think he was exhausted and disconsolate after that. Now, to jump forward, in 1970, when the Pakistanis began the crackdown in Bangladesh and 10 million or so refugees came to India, Indira Gandhi said, as you may all know, that they're not staying in India. And India intervened. And they sent that brilliant Jewish general, General Jacob, who was actually a good friend of mine. And he planned and fought the war. Now, as you know, the Americans sent the 7th Fleet to the Bay of Bengal and threatened India. And if you read Kissinger's memoirs, he curses Indira Gandhi. He absolutely curses. And there's a recording of President Nixon jumping up and down and cursing Mrs. Gandhi. In fact, there's an episode which is very interesting. Kissinger met the Chinese ambassador, Hua Huang, to the UN in a warehouse in New York, like mafioso, and said to Hua Huang, why don't you attack India? While India was intervening in Bangladesh. And Hua Huang, being the crafty man that he was, said, but your 7th Fleet is in the Bay of Bengal, why don't you? So that's how bad it became. And I'm afraid it never recovered. The relationship was very suspicious. And I'm going to say something which is going to shock everybody. The US had a hand in catalyzing the Indian emergency. This was the standard operating procedure they had used in Chile to overthrow Allende. They tried the same thing with the railway strike in India. They wanted to remove Mrs. Gandhi. This was the payback Kissinger had promised. So there was an American hand, and of course, they wrong-footed her because calling the emergency really delegitimized Mrs. Gandhi completely. And then, who knows how this bodyguard got so angry with her to want to kill her. Yes, he was upset about the Indian army being in the Golden Temple, but who got to him? Which dirty tricks were played to get him to kill Mrs. Gandhi? Now, I fast forward. India in 1991 had a big change of course in a crisis in economic terms, and that actually was quite accepted in the United States. We were trying to become a more market economy. And then really, it was Atal Bihari Vajpayee who made the decision to really move away. And that was already happening to become much closer to the United States because the Cold War was over, the Berlin Wall was down. And ever since then, India and the United States have grown closer and closer. And it is true, Bill Clinton and Hillary were not friends of India. Despite everything, they remained quite hostile to India right the way through the time he was president. And that has remained true of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has remained somewhat loyal to its old allegiance to Pakistan. But the thing which we all need to understand that in this world of international relations, the bottom line is you have no friends. everything is contingent, everything is self-interest. And it is not the case that India is a buddy of the United States. That is simply not true. India is imperative for US policy in Asia against China. Without Indian cooperation, the US is out of Asia. This the US will never concede. That is why India is important, not for any other reason. The US still is propelling vigorously the attempt to ensure massive religious conversion in India. US agencies, evangelists, intelligence officers, all the newspapers, the one thing they want is a huge Christian constituency. They feel a Christian constituency will make the Indian people loyal to the West and to the United States, as has been the case of Korea, which was 98% Buddhist. It's now 2/3 Christian. This is what they want for India, and they have never let up. And the recent upset with India is because they think the previous government opened the doors completely. And what has happened is that the Jagan Reddy YSR regime has allowed the Christianization of Andhra Pradesh. Now, one of the MLAs about 2 weeks ago said, yes, 25% and more of Andhra Pradesh are Christians. Many of the elite, the top filmmakers, are all Christians. So this has been a huge success that the Western Alliance have got a huge toehold in Andhra Pradesh, in Tamil Nadu, because the DMK actually is a pseudo-Christian party. And Kerala, of course, has always been an alliance of Christians and Muslims. Now, the reason why there's such a hue and cry about Muslims in India among the newspapers is because Muslims are the only large group who can keep the Indian government off balance. So they find in Islam a great ally while they proceed with the job of bringing Christianity. By using Islam to give India a bad name, keep it forever anxious about its reputation, and almost 99% of everything about persecution of Muslims in India is just pure fabrication. Let me repeat, pure fabrication. All you've got to do is sit down in front of the computer and do a comparative study of how many riots there were before 2014 when Modi became Prime Minister and how many since. How many deaths occurred, all these are in police statistics. You will find there has been far less. This business of Hindu-Muslim riots is a very unfortunate thing, but it is an old story. It has been happening in many parts of India for many, many years. In fact, it even goes back to the 19th century, as the British historian Chris Bailey has recorded. Of course, this is not something we want. The best way to destroy India would be a civil war between Hindus and Muslims. This is not something anybody would wish. And let me add, no government of India, even a right-wing so-called Modi government, doesn't want the trouble of riots. That is inconvenient. No government would like to have riots, which means you're losing control. So the other thing, of course, is the data has just shown in 2018, 80% of all government scholarships went to Muslims. 80%. This is how anti-Muslim Modi is. 80%, they are about what? 12%, 14% of the population. 80% of all scholarships went to them. The budget for the Minority Commission, which is mainly for Muslims and somewhat for Christians, has more than doubled. There is every reason for any government to make sure there is harmony in India because it's a prerequisite. This does not mean the differences will disappear or that we'll have justice for Hindus. It just means on pragmatic grounds to have a civil war is the worst outcome for India.
That's a good point.
That is why
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, please. No, so that brings me to a good point. I think we were talking earlier about so Rajiv Malhotra ji has talked about kind of the USCIRF and the evangelical connections and how some of these pronouncements about India being a country of particular concern and slamming India with reports and stuff has been a game that is being played when the ground reality, as you had mentioned, is very different. And there are a lot of patriotic Muslims in the Indian armed forces, as well as in the Indian government and stuff like that. And on a day-to-day basis, a lot of Muslims and Hindus can tell you very frankly, even in Kashmir, that there is harmony on a regular basis. However, some of these other forces have been trying to create a atmosphere that there is this widespread tension between Hindus and Muslims in India, and genocide or war is imminent. using these hyperbolic words and creating Hindu phobia has been a very strong thing. So what are your thoughts about the USCIRF?
The USCIRF is very simply a front for evangelists, that's all. And anybody who wants to understand this, please read the detailed recent article in the Sunday Guardian by Arvind Kumar, who many of you know because he lives in the United States. Read that article carefully. It provides chapter and verse in great detail and very brilliantly. It's very well researched. And another article which came out later, but the first one in the Sunday Guardian by Arvind Kumar will explain everything. The Indian government actually pays no attention to the USIRF. They pay no attention because they are so foolish that they are completely blatant. That discredits them. What they want to do is to create as much unrest in India as possible. So India will then listen to them. And what does listen mean? You allow more evangelists to come from the United States, from the UK, from Germany, from Scandinavia, and give them carte blanche to go and proselytize. They're outside Tirupati proselytizing, the holiest of the holies. They're outside many temples. They're cursing Hindu customs, Hindu worship. But this is an old story. You see, if you read the work of people like Professor Balagangadhara, Professor Prakash Shah, my colleague in London, you will find that these kinds of slanders were actually slanders which the Protestants used to use in the 17th, 18th century against Catholics and Jews. They just replaced that with Hindu. Actually, they're quite amazingly similar because they used to accuse the Catholics of idolatry. All of this was simply transferred, and the rationale was very simple. We must discredit, and then conversion will be easier. But when they were allowed to proselytize, which was after 1815, that was the first time Parliament very reluctantly agreed to pass a law. The British Parliament was not happy with this, but the evangelist lobby, they passed a law allowing them to evangelize. But between 1850 and 1870, they hardly converted 50,000 people. You see? Hindus were very resistant. Now, of course, they never tried to convert Muslims because that would have led to riots straight away. They never target Muslims. They only target Hindus. And one thing they did, they realized that the biggest single barrier to rapid conversion was the educated class committed to Hinduism, which I don't call a religion. It's not a religion. This idea of religion is a Christian import. We don't have a religion, you see. We don't have faith. We don't have belief. These are all Christian concepts. So let me leave that aside. They decided to attack Brahmins by creating a bogey, by saying Brahmins are the evil people. They are the racists. They are the ones who are contrary to the will of God because they have divided the society into us and them. So this was actually a strategy, you see, because Brahmins were being slaughtered on a massive scale by both the Portuguese in Goa, by the invaders, because as the great novelist V.S. Naipaul once said, if you want to control the body, you cut off the head. And the Brahmins, they correctly figured, were the only all India group across the country who were educated and knew what was going on. So they were obviously the natural target to disempower and to divide and to say to the others that Hinduism is simply a Brahmanical religion to oppress all of you. You see, even those who write about caste and say it was prevalent, like M.S. Srinivas, the great Indian anthropologist, he says, until the British began to do censuses, this caste division, particularly the whole concept of OBC, was very weak. You see, there was a lot of mobility, intercaste mobility in this entire middle area. Yes, there were Brahmins definitely, and every society has a stratification of people who are religious. And they said, the Brahmins are the religious group, but not all Brahmins are priests. And some of the greatest figures in the Hindu past were not Brahmins; they were Shudras. So they created this particular narrative, which now has become well established in all of academia. And basically, for me, it looks like this is a call for genocide, which happened after Gandhi's assassination in Maharashtra. Chitpavan Brahmins were attacked and murdered. What they are gearing up for is a massive backlash against Brahmins at some point in the future, which will be the fresh genocide, which the church will be very happy about.
And this was actually discussed by Nicholas Dirks in his book called Castes of Mind, another Princeton publication. where he talked about how the British actually inserted this law and the census and stuff like that, and the end results of that on the Indian society, and the major implications on that for Hindus as well. So, I'm glad you brought that up.
Let me just add one thing. The first census was in the Punjab. When they were doing the census, they were very unsettled because most people said, we don't know. Because they wanted to create basically a map of who is what. And they also wanted to create leaders in communities who would be responsible for taxation. They did that in Sri Lanka as well. They introduced caste in Sri Lanka because they wanted caste leaders who would be responsible for taxation and delivering the revenue. When we went to Punjab, they found a lot of people didn't know what caste they were. So they said, what do you do? What does your father do?
Yeah.
And then they created a caste, subcaste. So they created this caste, which, as Professor M. N. Srinivas says, they gave it a life, his words, gave it a life it did not have. And this game has become very well established. USCRIF is simply a vehicle for the religious conversion of India. And I'm sorry, they're having huge success. Huge success. Nepal today is 1/3 Christian already. It only took them, from 2005. And the Prime Minister of Nepal at the time was given a $5 billion bribe by the US Embassy to insert the word secular into the constitution. At the last minute in Parliament, the debate was over. The word secular was introduced into the constitution, for which he was given a $5 billion. He's dead, so I can say that. $5 billion.
Wow. So it's a very strategic intervention there.
Absolutely.
Wow. Amazing. So let's come back to this point about caste, because what is happening is there are 2 points. One is, and there are a few points that I want to discuss, but the first one was, speaking of caste. So number one is, you are in the UK, and there's a lot of discussion around legislation on caste that you and others had vehemently fought against, and to inform the general public as well as lawmakers about not passing a resolution about the caste system and all this stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what are the lessons that we as Hindus in the US can learn from that particular? Because the reason I'm asking that question is because I want to come back to another point in a little bit, because it's connected. So first, I wanted to get your perspective on that.
I went to a meeting with the government civil servants in 2009, 11 years ago, with somebody from the Swaminarayan and somebody from the Hindu Forum of Britain. And I'm afraid the Swaminarayan gentleman ranted and raved, which I told him not to do. I said, we should listen to what they have to say. And at the very end, I said to the civil servants, that you demonstrate there's a caste problem, and I will support the legislation. You show me empirically that there is a problem. They heard everybody out. They hardly said anything. And then they said, there are no plans to introduce any legislation. And we went happily. And then in 2010, during Margaret Thatcher's funeral, when the Conservatives were in the chapel in Westminster, this bill came up in Parliament and the Labour Party voted it through. It was one element of a larger Equalities Act. They introduced caste. That is where it began. Now, I'm afraid you must take this on board very carefully. I've lived here for almost 50 years. The British are far too clever for us. We are not very good. They run rings around us. They control all the Hindu organizations. All the Hindu organizations, all of them are attached to political parties. They get money, they get OBs, honors. So I'm afraid DIPF, Dharmic Ideas and Policy Foundation, is the only fly in the ointment, because we don't play ball. We are outside completely. We neither take money, nor do we listen to them. Now, what they have done is they wanted to legislate on caste. But because you have to consult for legislation, we obliged them to do a survey. And they did a survey which was very tendentious and framed in such a way that it was bound to support the government. So we went to a meeting with the government after that, my team, the team of the DIPF, and we cornered them. And we forced them to withdraw the interview for 3 months. Because we said to them, the contents of the survey were totally illegitimate and inconsistent. And they couldn't argue. They swallowed very hard. And in the end, they showed us grudging respect because no Hindu organization had done this to them before. But I went with Professor Shah, myself, and my good friend Dinesh Patel, the lawyer, and we had got very well prepared. We had notes and everything in front of us. Unfortunately, the Hindu organizations didn't play ball with us. What happened was the government said, we won't pass the legislation, but we will take caste law and leave it to the courts to adjudge. Now, there was only one case before the courts where the courts convicted a Buddhist couple of caste discrimination against an Afghan Christian servant. A Buddhist couple.
Wow.
And if you look at the court proceedings in which Minesh Patel was a lawyer at the very end, he couldn't get in there early enough to stop all this nonsense. The court proceedings were haywire, totally haywire. You see, if we had been called as expert witnesses, but we weren't, because the poor Buddhist couple, they were bankrupted. They had to sell their house in compensation. And the funniest part of the story is the entire, £185,000, which is $250,000, didn't go to the Christian servant. It went to legal fees. The complainant got nothing. That was the funniest part. Now, the Hindu organizations, we are happy with caste law. We have been saying caste law is the worst outcome because it leaves discretion to judges who know nothing and who are Christian and hostile to us. Whereas the legislation would have given an exemption. For example, in the legislation, they could have said any business with fewer than 5 employees will be exempt from the law. Any religious organization. Now what's happening that Garba can be sued. If we refuse somebody in Garba entry, you can be sued for caste discrimination. But Garba is a community organization. The Patels have their own Garba. The other groups have of course, they don't actually refuse anybody because I go to them and I'm not a Patel, I'm not even Punjabi. They don't refuse me. They're very happy. But if you do that, you can be sued. And what will happen is you lose your charitable status in law, which means you'll go bankrupt. Now, this is only one part of the story. This caste law is not aimed at British Hindus at all. It is not aimed at. We are just the bakra. We are just the goats for slaughter. This legislation is aimed against India. What they want to use this legislation for is to force India to extend reservations to Christians and Muslims, which will open the dam to conversions. The one reason many Hindus don't convert is they get reservations. Now, of course, these reservations are being given to Christians because they don't change their names. They give it to Muslims in Bengal. So it's being breached, but the law actually does not only allows Hindus and Buddhists to get reservations. So they want this legislation removed and they want to use this. Now, once Britain passed legislation, all the courts in the Commonwealth who look to British judicial proceedings will adopt that. All countries will have anti-caste legislation. The United States has said they're considering it. The whole of the EU said they're considering it. So the whole world will have caste legislation with which to beat Indian governments on that. Now, they tried this in Durban in 2005. And at that time, no, 2001, sorry, 1 or 2, Atal Bihari Vajpayee's ambassador fought it off. They wanted to introduce in the UN Conference on Racism that casteism is a form of racism, and we fought it off. This time, there's a very powerful gentleman in England, a Hindu, who has persuaded the Indian government not to do anything. I had spoken personally to Sushma Swaraj, who understood everything in 2 minutes. And she was going to do something, but this very powerful gentleman, who's very Indian Hindu gentleman, who's close to the Indian government, has, I believe, smart belief, persuaded the government not to take a hard line. Because if the Indian government said to the British, we do not like, they would think twice. So this caste legislation is hanging like a sword of Damocles over our heads. This is not just an attack on Hindus worldwide. This is an attack on the very identity of India. This is one very important stratagem they want to deploy. And you see what will happen, you see. It passes. And then in the WTO, got nothing to do with caste. The WTO has provisions which say equality. They will bring up caste in the WTO. They said, no, you are not offering equality to Christians and Muslims. So you must extend reservations to these groups. So see, when the reservations were extended to Buddhists, I'm afraid by the BJP, by the RSS, I'm sorry, very sorry, there was a tsunami of conversion in UP. UP became Buddhist in large numbers once reservations were extended to Buddhists by the RSS. They wanted to hold a olive branch towards the Buddhists. This was a big mistake. It shouldn't have happened. Because in any case, we and Buddhists don't have conversion. There is no such thing as conversion. This is a Christian Semitic concept. But this is a very serious issue. People in America must understand what is going on. This is a game to really finish us off in the long run. We will become like Nagaland, Mizoram, Korea. We will lose everything we had in the last 5,000, 7,000 years.
So now, the reason I asked that question Thank you very much for that information. So let me bring up why I asked you that question. Because in the US, over the last several years, we have various groups that are really targeting this. So there's a group called Equality Labs that has been really spreading a lot of Hindu phobia here by showing how they're trying to equate Hinduism equals racism, basically. And they conducted a caste survey. They've been trying to create this narrative around that, caste system is pervasive in the Hindus in America, and it should be banned. There should be a law passed against that, things like that. But of course, there's a lot happening that we have been trying to work on and prevent that, because we want to educate people that, hey, this is not the way Hindu Dharma is and stuff like that. But what they've been doing is slowly building this, and they have certain allies. And not for this discussion, but the reason I'm bringing that up is because they published a caste report in 2017. They also went to a congressional hearing where they actually took this caste report and got some support from certain congressional leaders. And then what they've been doing is producing more and more of this information to create, quote unquote, evidence of caste discrimination in the community. And as I had brought it up to some people earlier, that imagine you go to the temple and the priest asks you, what is your gotra, right? You could literally be in trouble by saying that, hey, you know what, the priest is being casteist because he's asking me my gotra. Either I don't have a gotra or I don't know. So these are the types in the Vedic rituals, sometimes gotras is required. It's not always required, but sometimes there are yagnas and stuff like that. Again, I'm not an expert, but the point I'm trying to make is that these types of things are very dangerous in the United States, and this is a direct impact for Hindus. So I'm glad you brought that point up, because the reason I wanted to connect that from the UK is that's a lesson learned for the US.
Let me add 2 quick points. What you just described is identical to what was happening in the UK. Identical. Same thing, racism, but they were going to exempt religious institutions. So this business of citing your gotra for religious ceremony would not be affected. But my advice from my experience of fighting this is that the debate about what our dharma and our texts say is not the debate we should be having with them. The debate that we should have with them, and the one that I was trying to promote, and the government didn't like it, I said, first of all, we Hindus have no political power. You see, our main experience over here is of racism from whites. So we do not have the political power to impose anything on anybody. So that's the first thing. We are not anybody important enough to discriminate. And if you say there are 3 areas in which discrimination is possible, one is if you're a landlord, right? That's one way. And then if you're providing a public service like a doctor, right? Or you are running a restaurant, these kinds of things. Now, if you want to find out if there's caste, you examine these on a blind survey. You examine these areas. We're not going to talk about dharma, because this is a losing game. You find one quote, they'll find one quote. Empirically, you will find, I'm confident this is nonsense. There is no evidence of caste discrimination. And if you ask a doctor's surgery or anybody, but don't ask them, have you been subject to caste discrimination? Because that's a leading question. If you ask them about caste discrimination, they'll think, oh, somebody was rude to me. Oh, it must have been because of my caste. What you have to look at is their records of their caste, who they treated, who they spent time with, which patients complained about the quality of medical treatment. You see, same with hotels, because Indians own a lot of hotels and small,
the US.
And you look at their records. And with that, you establish everywhere Hindus who are not related to each other interact with each other. Restaurants, hotels, medicine, employment, Hindu establishments. When you employ people in your company, you look at the records to see, here in England, they found 3 cases. They found 3 cases from 1945, 3 cases. One was thrown out, and the other one was settled by Hindus. And then they cited 30 cases in a radio program where I was interviewed. 27 of them were against Gurdwaras.
Wow.
20. And the Sikhs went berserk. And now the Sikhs in England are saying, you can have the legislation, but leave the Sikhs out. Now they can't do that because their own survey showed it was Gurdwaras. And what they accused the Sikhs of was nonsense. They say that somebody, in the Gurdwara, they give you a glass of water to drink. They said, yes, this Ravidasi Sikh drank the water, and then they washed the glass because he's low caste. To which the Sikhs replied, we wash the glass all the time, no matter who drinks in it. This is the kind of nonsense we are being thrown out. So you should say to them, you do a blind and never let them formulate the survey. You have a professional statistician do the survey, and Agree the survey, that's the key. They will otherwise twist it to make sure they get the results they want. And you check employment, you check medical services, you check hotels, and you demonstrate there is no caste. Because, young people in the UK have no clue who's what caste in the school. And if you introduce this caste, and you see, if you introduce this caste registration, every person will register that caste.
Yes.
You see, you will bring up caste consciousness, which is not there. In order to legislate, everybody's caste must be recorded. And you will create a problem amongst the young that is not there. You see, this is an outrage they're attempting to do in the US, just as they tried to do here. The fight here is not over, but I'm afraid from what you say, your fight is just beginning.
Yes. So let's switch topic a little bit. Let's come to two important things that have happened in India over the last year. One was the passing of the CAA, and then the second one was on Article 370. So first, let's take a look at the CAA. One of the things that has been going on in the U.S. is there's a lot of again Hindu phobia being spread around CAA and around the kind of this agenda of this Hindu government to kind of destroy the minorities and stuff like that. Unfortunately, presidential candidates had made certain inaccurate comments that 200 million Muslims are being discriminated and all these things. So in this entire thing, the problem that we see is that nobody is talking about the refugees. Because typically speaking, when there is a law being passed to help refugees, the first voice that comes out is of the refugees. So in the US, the Lautenberg Amendment was passed to specifically help refugees. So the U.S. has its own version of CAA in a way passed in the I would say in the 90s, I think, and there was a lot of discussion around U.S. foreign policy and local U.S. policies around passing resolutions against India on this CAA. And when I say India, it's really targeting the Hindus, because what happens is that nobody's really talking about the refugees, right? In March, we had a huge attack on the Gurudwara in Afghanistan, and similarly, there have been attacks on Hindus in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and stuff like that, and conversions and rapes and all these things have been going on, but nobody wants to talk about that. So what are your thoughts on how the U.S. kind of like these resolutions being passed, even though they don't have an impact on India, generally speaking, what do you think happens generally as when the broader foreign policy is thought about?
Anybody who is using the CAA to attack India and Hindus is actually a sworn enemy. Simple as that. They are sworn enemies responsible for the worst form of Hindu phobia. It is like accusing Jews of poisoning wells and murdering them, which used to happen across Europe. This slander was used to murder Jews. This is a slander against us. Pakistan had 1/5 and more. Bangladesh had 1/3 Hindus in 1947. Pakistan, it is almost 2%. In Bangladesh, it is 8%. Why are these people fleeing? Why? Their daughters are being kidnapped. Their temples are being destroyed. Last month, in May, 10 temples were destroyed in Bangladesh. 10 temples, just in May. I have worked on this. The persecution, attacks on Hindus and Buddhists in Bangladesh is phenomenal. Now, this law does not have anything to do with Indian citizens. It applies only to refugees who have been in India by 2009. And the estimate number who have been in limbo all these years, for decades in some cases, is about 30,000. The CAA and anybody else who wants to be a refugee will have to go back and start all over again. They will have to apply like before. The CAA legislation was proposed in the 50s, 60s, Congress. There was no political dispute in India about this. Nobody proposed. In fact, there is full record in the parliamentary proceedings of Congress. The Communist Party in 2012, the Communist Party leader Prakash Karat asked for these Hindus, because most of these Hindus, by the way, in Bangladesh are Dalit Hindus in Pakistan. He asked for this to be legislated. So this accusation is merely a sign of hatred for Hindus, and we should not take it seriously. This was a one-off. The government mishandled the propaganda a little bit because, it was such an innocuous, humane piece of legislation. They actually underestimated that. But the protest in India was funded mainly from Dubai and via Pakistan. They used their assets to create this great big hue and cry. because this legislation does not apply to any Indian. It only applies to those groups who claim persecution. Now they're saying you must extend to Muslims. How can Muslims in Muslim Pakistan, which is the Islamic Republic, claim we are being persecuted? So they're now saying, oh, but what about Shias? What about Ahmadiyas? Excuse me. The person who proposed the Pakistan resolution was an Ahmadiyya. The Chief Justice of Pakistan was an Ahmadiyya. The general who almost defeated India, General Iftikhar Malik in 1965 and almost took Jammu and Kashmir, was General Iftikhar Malik. Ahmadiyyas have been loyal citizens of Pakistan. This is an internal Pakistan problem, not our problem. If they are persecuting and reacting to their own, and then there is another little problem. If they come and present themselves to the border, how do we know he's a Shia, Ahmadiyya? Because only way we know is circumcised, they're all circumcised. So any Pakistani who presents themselves, any terrorist who says I'm persecuted, we are with them. Excuse me, this is not going to happen. No Indian will allow this to happen. And you can curse India all you like, pass all the resolutions. All you're doing is you're identifying yourself as somebody who's a Hindu baiter, an unreasonable Hindu baiter, and we will remember. We will remember. And I want to add one thing. My mother's family is from what used to be East Pakistan. One group fled in 47. Another group fled Dhaka when there were riots and murder because they said the Prophet's hair in Hazrat Bol had gone missing. They went berserk. All in the internet, mass killing of Hindus, murder, rape, and then 71. My family came away in 47, 1962. Almost all of the people who are claimants for refugee status are Bengali Hindus of the scheduled caste. High majority. You're going to tell them? And when they say repeal the CAA, it means we have to force these people to go back. And that's what they say, repeal the CAA. Repealing it means we have to expel this. Now, the world is full of jokers, I'm sorry. Akalis are saying repeal the legislation. And now 30, 40 Sikhs have come to the border. They're saying admit them. At the one hand, they're saying repeal, and there are 30, 40 who have fled Pakistan. They're saying, no, please admit them. So we can't take these people seriously. We have to be firm. When justice is on our side, we will have to be firm. There is nothing to do with Muslims in India. How can the government persecute 200 million Muslims? Is this a joke? This is simply a lie of the worst kind. And really, it upsets me. And I say to Modi ji, you have not argued back strongly enough at this. But it was so transparently wrong to accuse the government of being anti-Muslim on this basis that I don't take it seriously anymore. And any US organization, any presidential candidate, you do this and Hindus will know this is a person we never vote for. The CAA is a humanitarian piece of legislation for about 30,000 people. It is fewer people who are in 3 trains from New Jersey going into work in New York, right? 3 or 4 trainloads of people going to work in New York. That is all, 30,000 plus, maybe a few more. And these people, if they are not given Indian nationality, it's being fast-tracked, that's all. Yeah. If they can't, then they can't go to government schools. They're not entitled to vote. They're not entitled to go to university. And we have created a little place in Calcutta, some friends of mine, where they can come for advice. A little house has been bought by a Bangladeshi Hindu solicitor to help them. These are people who are at the bottom of the heap. They have nobody. They have nothing. And we in DIPF have been raising money for them to help them to start their lives. And you are saying we expel them back to Pakistan and Bangladesh? I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. And we will all stand up and take the blows and refuse.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that.
As for the citizen registration bill, Bangladesh has one. Pakistan has one. Is there a country which does not register all its citizens? How do we allocate resources if we don't know the numbers? And who was leading the riots in Delhi? Bangladeshis and Rohingyas who have settled illegally around Delhi. Because if you have registration, they get found out. I didn't say this. In the book by the great Congress leader, who is not very friendly to Hindus, he writes there are 10 million illegal Bangladeshis in India. 10 million.
Wow, that's amazing. So these are very important points. So let's switch to actually 370. And there's been a lot of discussion around that too. And I think there's some echo. So maybe there's, if you could just adjust
Sorry,
that
there's
volume.
something which came up. I got rid of it.
Got it. So what I was saying is, coming back to Kashmiri Hindus. So even same thing, just like the CAA, Article 370 was passed. We have about 1 year anniversary coming up soon. And in this entire debate, there has been no discussion around Kashmiri Hindus. And every time there's a discussion that happens, they're always accused of, fanning Islamophobia or not engaging, or what about the rights of all and things like that. But we never see that kind of a debate happening for other religions or other minorities and stuff like that. So why is it only on Kashmiri Hindus? And what can Hindus in the US do in this situation?
Let me preface my remarks by saying, in the end, I don't blame the jihadis alone in Kashmir. And this problem is mainly a Pakistani problem. It is there where the arms training and the funding happens. This is a Pakistani problem. It would disappear if Pakistan stopped. It would disappear in no time. But we Hindus, non-Kashmiri Hindus, all collectively responsible for what has happened to the Pandits. They've lived in miserable camps with very few facilities, and they worked hard the last 30 years, got themselves educated, and I'm very sorry now they're dispersed around the world. Many of them will not be going back, and it is such a small community. They are going to disappear no matter what we do now, because when the population level falls below 100,000, that community disappears, which is what's happening to the Parsis of India. Kashmiri Pandits, I'm afraid, are in grave danger of disappearing totally, unless you include Jammu. Now, a wider philosophical point is this. The majority are not voting for Pakistan. If they had a vote, they'd vote for independence, which is not in the UN resolution, by the way. The UN resolution was you either go to Pakistan or to India. So that is not on the cards. The neighbors of the Pandits turned against them. I was speaking to a Pandit woman. She was 5 when she fled. She lives in Surrey, near London. She said, our neighbors, they came looking for the women. This is the old story in Islam. Any opportunity. Same thing happened to the Yazidis. Their neighbors from generations came and grabbed their daughters. That is the first thing they do. It was the neighbors who were saying, go, convert, or go without your women.
Yes.
Now, the fact of the matter is very simple. When the majority of a place wish to commit genocide, the wider majority of India has a moral obligation to stop them. We do not say the will of the majority in this little patch of the country will prevail. It is the majority of India as a whole which must prevail, and they have prevailed to say that this will not pass. And it has been going on for far too long anyway. That for 30 years, the governments have failed. Even the BJP governments in some states did not do much. That is why we were raising money. They did not do much for the Pandits. The Pandits have done whatever they have done for themselves because there was a relatively forward-looking, educated community. And basically, they did what every Hindu parent does, as you well know. They will starve but educate their children. And that's what the Pandits did. And many of them have been successful. They have moved out. And that, in a way, is a bit of a tragedy because, they have good, settled lives. They are doing well. Will they want to go back? 370 is a beginning. It is a wonderful beginning. And I applaud the courage of the government for doing it to stop this political impasse. In any case, 370 was introduced as a presidential amendment, a temporary presidential amendment. And it has been removed by a presidential amendment. And if you want to understand both 370 and CA, it is not me you should be listening to. You should Google our brilliant former Additional Solicitor General Harish Salve. Harish Salve, particularly on CA, in 10 minutes, he explains everything. Same for 370. So 370 is one of the great successes. Of course, much work needs to be done. And Modi is doing it. Huge resources are being poured for people across Kashmir to have a good life. And so that's why they started killing Hindu panchayats, village leaders. Yeah. So this is their way of terrorizing people. But I'm afraid this is not going to work because now the army is taking a hard line. They're looking out for them and they're eliminating them. And you see, over time, you see, left in peace, everyone everywhere wants to have a peaceful life. That's all. They want their children to go to work, go to school. They don't want to be pushed around. Nobody pushed the Kashmiri Pandits around. It is all the Kashmiri Muslims around. They were in the majority. It is the Pakistan intervention which has kept this problem alive. But I will simply add one more thing. This problem would have died in 1952-53 had it not been for the Cold War. The Cold War gave Pakistani demands a lease of life with US and British support. You see, in 1954, Nehru offered them a plebiscite. It is in the book by Alistair Lamb. He offered a plebiscite. The Pakistanis said no because they knew they were going to lose. And you know why? Because the Kashmiris remembered what they did in 48. Loot, rape, abduction. And in 48, the Pakistani tribals and the irregular army would have taken Srinagar. You know why they failed? They had captured so many women that they fled back to Pakistan to deposit the women. They abandoned the forward advance into Srinagar because they had captured so many women, they want to take them and dump. This story will not be allowed to happen. And you know, in 54, Muhammad Ali was then Prime Minister and Nehru made the offer. And he said no. And Alistair Lamb, the great white knight defender of Pakistan, said they were not confident of winning. That's why. Now that plebiscite is over. It is never going to happen because, first of all, one part of Pakistan, Kashmir, has been given away to China, Gilded Baltistan, big chunk. The Pakistan occupied Kashmir is now Punjabi Kashmir. It is all Punjabi, full of Punjabi. So who's going to vote for this? So this is not going to happen. India will enforce its will as best as it can, and everybody in this wonderful, beautiful place, which I've only visited once, can have a good life. And they need to think about the future because nobody is oppressing anybody anymore. Nobody is trying to stop your religious practices, and you should accept this reality. Because India, as many Muslims are saying, is the safest place in the world for Muslims. They have a lot of privileges, and there are very minor irritants. You know what Hindus don't like in their relationship? Very silly things. They don't like azan in the morning at 5 o'clock. There was no loudspeaker in the Prophet's time. They should give up loudspeaker, and so should other groups who are using it on a regular basis. Give up the loudspeaker. That is the kind of thing which upsets them, and there are a few temples which have to be restored. And then we will all live in peace, which is how we should live.
Absolutely. So let's, we're coming close to the session end. So I have a couple of things more. We were talking a few days ago about kind of like what the US Hindus can do to make an impact here of the way Hinduism or India are looked at and stuff like that. And one of the points that you had brought up is about the whole getting involved in the political process. So, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, your suggestions and recommendations for what Hindus should be doing in the US.
Well, this is a recommendation made to Hindus anywhere, whether it's West Bengal, England, or the US, but with some variations. First of all, please go out and vote. If you care so much, go out and vote. If you don't, vote in a system which runs on elections. Nobody will give you the time of day. So please go out and vote. In 1946, when the vote on partition happened in places like Tamil Nadu, in Madras, Muslims carried their ailing and aged grandparents on their shoulders to the polling booth. And 90% almost voted for Pakistan. So you guys, instead of hand-wringing and getting upset, first thing you must do is vote. Second thing, which is not very difficult particularly for Hindu Americans who are all pretty well educated, be well informed, do the research. There's a lot of stuff available there. And if you need some help, come to DIP, come to the organization in the United States to be well informed about the debates. Like I've explained the CIA to you, I've explained 370 to you. Be well informed so you can prevail in debate. And thirdly, a very important thing we discovered when the Indo-Nuclear Accord was being negotiated, keep records of any donations you make to political representatives. Because in a crisis, you need these people's names to lobby. So we need a master record of every donation. So you must evolve a system where if you make a donation, you do it for your IRS, I suppose, because you get a tax rebate. You must find a way of recording it. So these three things: please go out and vote. Please be well informed and debate about the rights and wrongs. And most of the things you want to debate are not extremist, unreasonable things. They are things which you are failing to explain. That is why people in Seattle pass a resolution against CIA. How absurd is that? And thirdly, if you give money, particularly if you're somewhat well off, make sure you keep records. And these records are very precious, as we discovered, because we knew during the Indo-US nuclear accord negotiation who to lobby. And then one minor thing which I am guilty myself of not doing properly, but I have learned, so let me share that experience. Make sure you take your children to temples. Otherwise, they are vulnerable to being misled into this university racket of secularism, which is basically a weapon to beat us on the head with. They are vulnerable to all this nonsense about Christianity. So take your children to temples. There are wonderful books. And quickly, if there is one book a teenager can be given, is a book published by the Indic Academy by somebody called Aravinda Rao. Aravinda Rao has written a very actually good book. He gave it to me when I met him in Delhi in the World Hindu Congress. And I thought, oh, it's just another book. And then when I read it, I thought, wow, this is very good. So Aravinda Rao's book actually very well. It's also great for undergraduates. It's well written. And there are some lovely things written by your very own Aditi Banerjee on Hindu festivals. And there is a lot of stuff. So educate your children and educate yourself on who you are and where you want to go.
Fantastic. And I mean, CoHNA doesn't really endorse, obviously, any political candidates, but going out and voting is very important. And what ends up happening is we as Hindus take it very lightly. And we're not involved in the political process. We're not involved in the local, advocacy work and stuff. And that's something CoHNA is trying to do to create awareness without supporting any particular political candidate. We are bipartisan. But the idea is people need to be vocal. People need to get out. People need to understand what their tradition is about, why it exists for thousands of years, why other people around the world are actually taking our treasures. And that's why it's so important. And this whole, once you understand yourself, right, you will be more empowered to do these things. So Gautamji, I want to really thank you for this wonderful, wonderful interaction. And looking forward to more of these sessions as we go forward. And any other suggestions that you have, please share with us. We would love to get your advice for CoHNA. There's a lot to do. We have a lot of things going on. Some of these resources that you mentioned, we're going to be putting up in our websites and stuff like that, creating resources for Hindus to educate our youth and parents as well, because I think parents need to be educated first. Then the kids can be educated. So once again, thank you, Gautamji. And please, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Let's just quickly end by saying, what you're doing is very important. So I really wish you well. But this is what needs to happen, that you reach out and educate people and help them to understand. So it's a wonderful initiative, and I hope we will copy you in the UK.
We'll definitely work together, and we look forward to your advice also. Thank you, and namaste.
Namaste. Namaste. Thank you very much, all of you.